The men and women who fought here 50 years ago are truly heroes.
It was a brutal war.
This is an ungodly place to fight a war, and these men and women fought that war for 3 years.
It was a costly war.
The United States is used to winning wars, not having stalemates.
It is an unfinished war.
We fought for 3 years and ended up basically where we started. Doesn't seem right, doesn't seem just, doesn't seem equitable.
God rest them all, especially those guys that died.
Tonight, the forgotten war. Remembering the past, fearing for the future.
From ABC News. This is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Chris Bury.
So you thought the Cold War was over. After all, Polish troops now serve under a NATO commander. Berlin is the free capital of a united Germany, and capitalism is taking hold in Moscow. But the Korean Peninsula remains a stubborn reminder of a Cold War conflict that never really ended. No peace treaty was ever signed after more than 30,000 American troops were killed. Perhaps that's why this week's 50th anniversary of the truce has been so low-key. Americans, by and large, don't like to celebrate a tie. But in some ways, the standoff is even more dangerous than it was in 1953 when the fighting ended. Earlier this month, North Korea declared it had resumed its production of plutonium and fully intended to make nuclear weapons. In the last 24 hours, U.S. officials have gone from exchanging insults with the North Koreans to expressing optimism for multilateral talks to cool off the crisis. The situation is serious enough that a former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, warned last week that the conflict is, quote, a formula for drifting into war. And no one is more aware of the consequences than those Americans who fought in Korea a half-century ago. Freelance journalist Phil Ittner recently accompanied a group of veterans back to the peninsula where the Cold War, such a relic to most of the world, is heating up again.
"50 years after the fact, the veterans of the Korean War finally got their parade this week. 50 years after the fact, the gun fired again, but this time in salute, to mark the moment 5 decades ago when the guns finally fell silent after 3 years of war, the first and the worst open conflict of the Cold War. The war's legacy is a land divided, a single people separated by ideology and a tense border, a legacy born out of blood. Blood shed by, among others, American soldiers, who may have been little older than boys in the 1950s, but who are today old men. Old men who, half a century ago, left something of their childhood here in this foreign land. Men like Ralph Webb, wounded on July 4th, 1953, just 3 weeks short of the end of the war. Men like Joe Carano, a first-generation Italian-American from Long Island, who served with pride in the American 2nd Infantry Division. Or men like Ken Roberts, who earned a Silver Star in Korea, married a Korean woman, and adopted 2 children from the war-torn nation. And also men like John McDonald, a reluctant soldier who manned a machine gun over the Chorwan Valley, even though he would have preferred to be bird watching. All of these men know the horrors of war. They know the deprivation of fighting in sub-zero temperatures, poorly equipped and badly led. They saw firsthand the misery and the tragedy of a country divided, the savagery of a civil war backed by superpowers. And when hundreds of thousands of North Korean and later Chinese soldiers swept down into the south to try and install a Stalinist regime, they learned the terror of endless waves of the enemy crashing upon their position. And so these men, like so many of the other thousands of veterans from over 21 nations, traveled long distances to come back to this country, to pay tribute, and to come to terms with what they went through so many years ago. And one of the first things they noticed is that South Korea is no longer the land they left. It is a nation that, after many years of shaky development, has become vibrant and prosperous. That change is not lost on these veterans, who know that it is they who made it possible. They who gave the South Koreans a chance to build something of their own, and it fills them with pride.
All these soldiers saved this country, but they are a wonderful culture that built the country. It's just amazing what they've done.
And the Korean people remember the sacrifices these soldiers made. Protests around the country these days are aimed against the current American deployment, not the efforts of the past. Throughout their visit to Korea and the sites where they fought, these men are treated with the utmost respect. Soldiers feel obligated to salute. Military vehicles provide them escort. Places where brass bands await their arrival. And jeeps are ready to carry those who can no longer march up steep hills. To observation points where high-ranking officers step away from their duty of manning the line to show their appreciation to what were a bunch of enlisted men, grunts, who came from afar and helped keep their country free from an oppressive regime.
Korea is able to prosper because the veterans risked their precious blood and lives. I hope we can maintain in the future the friendship that originated 50 years ago, a friendship as blood brothers.
For some of the veterans, the warm reception and the developed country they've returned to finally answers a question they've held in their hearts for decades. Why did we fight?
I always thought it was not worth it, but it was. Because you come here, you see the people, you see the people, they're wonderful people.
And it isn't just Koreans who show their appreciation. During this commemoration, these men got a chance to rub shoulders with history makers and the cream of the world's military. And to the man who's been handed down the baton of leading U.S. forces here, General Leon Laporte, it is the least they can do.
Well, these men paid tremendous sacrifices. The heat of the summer here in Korea, the depth of the cold winters, the rugged, demanding terrain. This is an ungodly place to fight a war, and these men and women fought that war for 3 years. We owe them a tremendous place of honor in the history of the United States military. The men and women who fought here 50 years ago are truly heroes.
The border between South Korea and North Korea remains one of the most dangerous strips of land in the world. That part of the story when we come back.
This is ABC News Nightline.